Wow, a couple of interesting headlines kind of connect together. Neil, this is interesting. Folks, I don't know if you knew this. I don't think I did. I know about the crime statistics a little bit. You probably do. And we are concerned about, they tell us that there's such a high crime rate in the United States. But check out this headline. USA has third highest murder rate in the world unless you subtract the 5 biggest metropolitan cities, and then we are 189th out of 193. What? Yeah. A couple of little blurbs from this article. You can ride through the busiest cities in America. You'll see the littered streets of chaos, especially in cities like Chicago, Detroit, Washington, D.C., St. Louis, New Orleans. Just remove those 5 cities from the murder statistics of the USA, and we're barely even on the map anymore. Did you know that? I didn't really know that.
I heard something a lot similar last year at some point. People were talking about different things. And because I knew we were higher, but if you took out, 3 or 4 of those big cities.
Yeah, 5 of them.
Maybe 5, yeah. It made it was a drastic difference. And most of those are places where you're not even allowed to have a weapon in those cities.
Supposedly, right?
Yeah. Well, obviously they're there.
Somebody's got them.
Yeah.
Well, here's another little blurb. Drive 30 minutes outside of any major city and the crime rate plummets to next to 0. The only reason the United States ranks 128th in the safest countries of the world, according to the Global Peace Index, is because of a handful of horrifically violent metropolitan cities, period. And the biggest factor in figuring this safety gauge is the murder rate. So, for example, St. Louis is the highest. They have nearly a 70, murders out of every 100,000 people. It's horrible high. Baltimore, 51. New Orleans, 40. Detroit, 39. Cleveland, Ohio is 33.7, higher than Chicago. I didn't know that. But, folks, when you read some information like that, you and I can discern something big time. That by and large, America is a very safe place to live. Just don't live in a metropolitan area. And, it's sad that it's that way. There's unfortunately a common denominator with these cities. I don't know. I'm just pointing this out. They're all run by Democrats. That might sound political, but, it's just an observation. I'm not really picking on the Democrat. But, you might want to look around, scratch your head and say, what are we doing that's so horribly out of place that we can't get this under control? Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have your own answers. You can discern things for yourself. But that seems to be the case. But, that's just amazing. Now, guess what else is happening? Here's another headline, very interesting. Wow, families flee blue cities as crime ravages even the suburbs, kind of creeping out into those suburbs. Well, here's a summary. Just a couple of blurbs from this article. People are leaving Chicago. People are leaving New York State. About 1 million left the state last year. Most of them headed for Florida. I think the snowbirds are going to start staying up here because they can't go out for their lunches down in Florida for the traffic. I don't know.
It is busy. I was there in February. It's busier, or March. It's busier than ever. It's always busy, but hopefully they don't leave the reason they're leaving and take that with them.
I got a feeling there's a lot of Floridians that will straighten them out pretty quick. But anyway, that's an amazing statistic. California is losing hundreds of thousands. They're leaving. And Portland, Oregon lost 10,000 in the last year or so. Here's a blurb from a Philadelphia resident. Now, this is somebody that lives in the city, and it's their observation. I just found it interesting. It says, one Philadelphia resident describing the constant echo of gunfire in that city said, quote, "It sounded like Beirut out here yesterday. And I've never been out to Beirut, but it sounded like Beirut out here yesterday." Beirut, Lebanon, Wow. Well, I wouldn't know. We don't live in that particular setting. But there's a lot of stress there. And who can Who can blame folks for leaving the big cities for areas that are more safe?
Yeah, especially those with families and things like that, because your kids got to walk to school and you're going to work and doing all these things. And certainly we know there are a lot of people working and living in these cities. Obviously, they're metropolitan areas, so a lot of people are there. I heard a report, it was probably last year at some point, and they were making the argument, they were talking about gun violence, and they were trying to make the argument that, well, several of the states that, like the more conservative or red versus blue deal, they're just as bad on gun violence. But when you broke it down by the cities, it wasn't even close as far as how the cities individually were run. It is something to at least look at when you're constantly berating and scaling back law enforcement, and then your crime. I mean, we saw it in Minneapolis in 2020. Their crime rates skyrocketed, and then you had all these city council members saying, "We're not sure why my district had more murders this year." And I'm like, I mean, we defunded a good chunk of the police, and a lot of them just quit because we don't have to tolerate it. It seems to be a logical conclusion.
Well, interesting. The word says righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. There's a lot of ungodliness concentrated in our metropolitan areas. The violence, the crime, breakdown of the family, immorality, pornography, drugs. If we don't want to have the discipline to deal with those issues and you just let it continue to multiply, then your cities become what we're looking at. Another interesting thought, and we're going to move on today, but I'm sure you folks have seen these. Have you seen, in an election cycle when they put up the map and they show how people are voting, and you look at the whole country and it's like red from coast to coast, except you have these little enclaves of blue everywhere, only in the metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. And there's another thing that's connected to most of these metropolitan areas, and that's our universities. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. These have become strongholds for ungodliness. I'm sorry. And it's troubling our country when most of the country is very peaceable and knows how to prosper. And, righteousness is connected to that. We're either going to fear God and teach our people to fear God and seek practical righteousness. Now, we need salvation, which is a different issue. But if you want to have a civil society, you got to teach little Johnny, you can't steal, son, or you're going to jail. It's that simple.
Yeah, and if there's no repercussion for it, if there's no discipline on the other side of that, it's just going to continue and get worse. You can see that with your own children, obviously.
Well, if you want another prayer point, pray for revivals in our cities, that the Lord will push back the ungodliness and that our people will have the good sense to fear God, lift up standards of righteousness, and lift up an expectation that folks turn away from sin.